Today we have on with us Scott Albert from Southern Illinois of Kite Vineyard, and he also has his own label called...
The Holotype Wine Company is the name of that brand,
I should have said that.
which I started in 2016 with my wife, just as kind of a side project, something to, build up a wine business of my own rather than just the one I work for. And really the concept behind that brand is to highlight terroir and what grapes can do based on where they're grown. We're in the Shawnee Hills AVA in Southern Illinois. So obviously that's where the wines we're growing are coming from right now. And that's the idea behind it, is just to really highlight locality with wine.
Awesome. I'm so excited to hear more about that. Thank you so much for coming on our podcast with us today. And we will definitely be talking all things wine, especially from the Shawnee Hills AVA. Okay.
Happy to be here.
So when people think Shawnee Hills, Scott, it's not like Northern Illinois where it's all cornfields, is it? What is it like down where you're at?
Yeah, if you're not from Illinois or haven't spent a whole lot of time in Illinois, your perception of the state is probably it's very flat with farmland, or you've been to Chicago and you've seen the Sears Tower. It's called the Willis Tower now, but we still call it the Sears Tower. Those kind of things. And it's true, a lot of Illinois is flat farmland, but there are throughout the state little pockets of unglaciated areas that are still very hilly, and also river valleys where there's hills and cliffs and things like that. So throughout, what's called the prairie state, we do have little pockets of areas that are really nice to grow grapes. And at the very southern part of the state is the Shawnee Hills. And through the last two ice ages, we are further south than the glaciers made it to kind of level the land and make the farmland that exists throughout much of the state. So we're a little bit higher elevation, very rocky. There's valleys and ridges and cliffs here in Southern Illinois, and it's a really interesting place to grow grapes.
That's awesome. What's the weather like?
We have a longer growing season than a lot of the rest of the state, just because we are so far south. Illinois is about 400 miles north to south, which is a huge distance. You can imagine how much variance there is in length of growing season and just climate in general in that distance. So we're hot in the summer, not nearly as cold in the wintertime as areas even just 100 miles further north of us.
So you're talking what kind of winter temperatures is typical?
0 degrees Fahrenheit is really, really cold here. I've seen that happen only a few times now. We had a temperature that got a bit lower than that. We had -6 in 2022, which is by far the coldest it's been in 50 plus years. But most years, we're seeing single digit temperatures, 1 or 2 nights throughout the winter, and that's as cold as it gets.
Okay. So what do you grow down there in the Shawnee Hills?
Our main variety is Chambourcin. That's definitely the most common. It kind of thrives here. We do, one aspect of our growing region is that we have high humidity late summer and fall, and Chambourcin tolerates humidity very, very well. Other than that, we're growing a lot of Chardonnay, Vignoles, Traminette, Vidal Blanc, a bit of Cabernet Franc, a little bit of Viognier. So we're able to do some vinifera varieties down here. Those are kind of the main ones. Norton is also another really common one. Saval Blanc is another common variety.
Wow. Yeah, I can't grow any of those where I am in Northern Iowa. So, okay. So you say Chambourcin is one of the most, that's kind of your flagship grape in your area?
Yeah. Just about anybody that has vines in the ground in Southern Illinois has at least a little bit of Chambourcin for the most part. I'm trying to think of any examples that don't. Nothing's coming to mind right away. So that's definitely the most planted and most common variety here. And it's nice because it's very versatile. You can make lots of different wine styles out of Chambourcin.
Yeah.
Just based on harvest timing and techniques and whatnot.
Okay, so for those of us who aren't familiar with Chambourcin, like at all, I've never even heard of this grape. What is this?
It's what is called a French-American hybrid, which kind of is a term that people either a lot of times don't like to use because the term hybrid kind of makes people have negative connotations. When you really look at it, it's not, kind of all grape varieties are hybrids at some level or another. It's just unfortunate that there's this group of wine grapes that are called hybrids that got this negative connotation. So I want to get that out of the way. And there's nothing really negative about Chambourcin for our climate. It, like I said, is versatile. We use it a lot for dry rosé, and we'll pick it earlier in the year. When you do that, it tends to have a lot of citrus characteristics to it. I guess I should say it's a red grape. I don't think I said that yet.
Oh,
Red grape variety that we can use for rosé. And depending on when it's picked, very citrusy earlier in the season. You get more characteristics of peach, bright tart cherry, a little bit of watermelon is very common in our rosés. And then going throughout the season, you can use it for more of like a Beaujolais style wine. If you pick it sort of mid-season, we're talking mid to late September here in Southern Illinois, and everything down to a barrel-aged red. And for those, we're typically picking it higher sugar, higher alcohol potential in early to mid-October. And those wines are usually more characteristic of darker fruits, blackberries, raspberry, that sort of thing.
So you're picking it like a month apart, depending on what you're using it for. Is that what I understand?
Yeah, even 6 weeks,
Huh.
from start to finish. Early rosé is usually the last or second to last week of August, all the way through. I've picked Chambourcin, commonly second week of October. It can be made into a port style too. I've picked Chambourcin into November for port style wines.
that is a lot of different styles of wine that you can make out of one
Yeah.
grape variety.
Trying to count, I've made at least I think 12 different, completely different wine styles out of Chambourcin. So it's really nice to have that versatility with one grape variety that does well here.
12. Okay, so I'm just trying to brainstorm here. So you said dry rosé, you said regular dry red, Beaujolais style dry red, port sweeter late dessert wine style, right? What else?
Yeah, you
What
can
else
do
did you do?
a sweet red wine with it. I don't know if you just said, a dry barrel aged wine. We've done traditional method sparkling wine with it. We've done pét-nat with it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a number of things. Oh, we've kind of done like a late harvest style with it before.
Mm-hmm.
We've blended it with some white wine to make blush wines. It's there's just a lot you can do with it.
Okay.
I saw on your website that do you have a Chambourcin pét-nat now? Is that available? Is that what I saw?
Yeah, it's in the bottle right now. We haven't released it yet.
Okay. Gotcha.
That's awesome. We've talked a little bit about pét-nat in the podcast before. Can you explain a little bit about your pét-nat process?
Yeah, I think what people think of with pét-nat is usually you'll have primary fermentation going on and you'll bottle the wine, put a cap on it, and that's the wine. I do it a little bit differently in that I slow the fermentation way down, and actually will cold stabilize the wine and let it go through the winter. And then I'll usually bottle again in the spring with that natural sugar that's left. And depending on the situation, I'll either repitch a little bit of yeast or use the yeast that's still just present in the wine. With this pét-nat, it was actually a repitch situation. I just didn't think we had enough left in the bottle to go. The reason I like to do that is because it helps limit the amount of yeast that's in the bottle. I don't disgorge our pét-nats.
Mm-hmm.
And that way it helps limit just the amount of yeast sludge you get in the bottom of the bottle.
Cool. That's awesome. That's an interesting way of tackling the sludge problem. I've definitely seen that before.
Yeah, if there's too much, it can just really clog up the wine, let's say.
And then you have less wine because you're not going to drink that part.
Right.
You guys are making this sound unappealing, calling it sludge.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm just joking. Yeah.
The yeast
Well-
lees, let's say. Yeah.
There you go. Yeast.
Maybe this way. It's very proteinaceous, so it's a good source of protein if you do want to drink it.
Round out my diet.
Yeah, you can drink the sludge if you want. Well, that sounds really exciting. I think when do you expect that to be ready, Scott? Asking for a
Here for
friend.
summer, we'll have it out.
Okay.
sometime later this spring.
Okay. Okay. So was that originally a rosé version of Chambourcin then, and fermenting in tank? Is that how you
Yes.
did that?
Yeah.
Okay. 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 Interesting.
You mentioned Shawnee Hills being unique, you know, based on soil, climate, all that kind of stuff. If you had to like say one or clarify, what makes it unique that you think is positive or makes the grapes and wines from Shawnee Hills stand out?
One thing, if I had to pick one thing, I'd say it's
Or
probably
two.
soil
Yeah.
drainage. We're usually planting vineyards on ridge tops here. With, what's nice about our area is we have decent amount of topsoil, so we don't have vines that, have high irrigation need here. Um, and then below that is bedrock that is very well drained. So
Okay.
we have some really nice vineyard sites. That plays into also, cold air drainage and frost protection. If we have some elevation, that usually helps us out in the springtime. We do occasionally have frost issues here, maybe 1 or 2 years out of 10, but the site selections definitely help with that. That just coupled with the longer growing season being at our latitude here, allows us to grow some vinifera varieties and some other varieties that are less common further north in the Midwest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really cool. You're right in between the two. You're right in between what vinifera can handle and needing to have hybrids.
Yep.
So would you say being able to choose when you harvest, like I would say in more northern regions, I mean, there's some Chambourcin grown in southern Iowa. In Michigan, they have a long season, but it's not as hot. So would you say the Shawnee Hills, you have both the heat and the length of growing season where you can just decide when to pick? You can do stuff fully ripe if you want later. You can pick it earlier. Is that fair to say that's a positive thing that you guys can utilize?
Yeah, based on the goal for winemaking, we, like I said, have that long, oftentimes 6-week picking window,
Yeah.
which is definitely an asset to have. It allows us to, not have the bulk of our fruit all coming in the same week, and it gives us that versatility with what we can do with it.
Yep. It's like oftentimes like here, you know, after October, things aren't ripening much, even if it's on the vine, it's just too cold. So
It's
it's
freezing by that point.
Yeah, nothing,
not
nothing you can
always,
do.
but
Just pick it and see what you can do
right,
with it.
right.
Yeah.
Yep. So we can kind of pick when we harvest, but you have more flexibility for that to hone in what flavors you want. So
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what do you look for in a Chambourcin when you are making a rosé wine?
Well, probably first and foremost, we want to have a decent acidity, a backbone of acidity there. So that's part of the reason we're usually picking on the early side.
Mm-hmm.
Our TAs are usually, 7 to 8 grams per liter, maybe a little bit higher depending on the season. I
Mm-hmm.
usually will pick in 2 different rounds for rosé. One, like I said, in our area, it's usually the third or fourth week of August. Our bricks are low, probably 18 or so. Like I said, the TA is up around 8 grams per liter. Um, and we're very citrus forward, so we're looking for grapefruit characteristics, lemon, lime, that kind of thing. At that time of year too, our color is also quite reduced from what it would be later on. So for a rosé, if you're going for a nice light style rosé, it's beneficial for that too. Tannins are lower, so we're not talking about, there's not nearly as much phenolic component to the rosés. We're going to pick, early in the morning, cool grapes. I'll usually chill our Chambourcin for rosé down overnight in the cooler too. I find that helps a lot with color extraction. Chambourcin's a very colorful variety. Let's say it's really easy to extract color out of it. So with rosés, even with direct press, we're getting some color out of it.
Mhm.
And having them chilled down helps limit that some. So that's what we're looking for the early stuff. We'll usually then do another pick 2 to 3 weeks later. It's getting up around 20, 21 bricks. You're starting to get a little bit more red cherry character, maybe a little bit of raspberry. And the idea is then that those two components get blended back together in some proportion, gives the wine a little bit more complexity. We end up with wines that are balanced with acidity. They have this citrus component to them that is, light and aromatic, along with a little bit of red fruit. Really just makes it a delicious wine.
That sounds amazing. Do you blend before fermentation, or do you finish those two lots separately and then blend together?
I'll finish them separately, and
Okay.
usually just not long before bottling, come up with the final blend.
That sounds delicious. Oh my gosh, I wish I had a bottle in front of me right now.
It's also kind of interesting, I think generally assume citrus flavors with white grapes, I mean that's the stereotype, so it's interesting to hear that you're picking a red early to get those notes.
When we first started noticing those characters in Chambourcin, they're aromatics that are often associated with thiols in grapes, and we've found that Chambourcin's a pretty decent thiol providing variety. And the more the more techniques you do to highlight that, the more it comes out. So if it's choosing a certain yeast strain or just fermentation temperature, other techniques like that, we're also really, really limiting oxygen exposure to the rosé juice and wine. That helps highlight thiols a little bit more as well, we find.
Hmm. Okay, so
The other thing that I
thiols.
like to do, if we're talking, go ahead and talk about thiols
I
for a
just I
second.
just wanted to comment on the thiols. So typically thiols that you might be smelling would be like guava notes or some tropical fruit, thick fruit kind of notes. That's what I always think
Yeah.
of as thiols.
I always use with our Chambourcin just like ruby red grapefruit or pink grapefruit as
Grapefruit.
a good thiol
Great.
benchmark. And that typically can come out pretty well.
Perfect. Thank you.
But what I also like to do is do a little bit of lees contact with these wines too, a little bit of stirring, batonnage in stainless steel tanks, if you will,
Mhm.
just because that really gives it a more round mouthfeel. So that's a component of our rosé program as well, typically.
So what about for reds? How do you approach Chambourcin for red wines? You mentioned you're doing a lighter style and then a barrel aged style. How do you approach when you harvest and so forth and winemaking from a red perspective?
Yeah. So again, it's coming down to acidity for me for harvest decisions on that. If I'm going to do, we do a kind of just a light, very fruit forward, early release, no oak contact red with Chambourcin. It ends up being just a really cherry dominant wine. It's almost just like, eating fresh cherries. We're picking those mid to late season. It's usually the very end of September, like September 25th, September 30th, something like that. We're usually around 22 bricks. The TA is a little bit lower than for rosé. We're looking at between probably 6 and 7 grams per liter. And we're looking for quick, clean fermentations. We're usually only maybe between 3 and 5 days on the skins. We're not looking for, again, much tannin extraction at all. Chambourcin's a variety that doesn't have a lot of tannin to begin with, which is also maybe why it lends itself to these wine styles pretty well. Um, so that being said, for these, I call it Beaujolais style wines. I'm not doing much carbonic maceration with these like you'd expect with, if we're going to say Beaujolais wines, but ends up being a wine that still has a lot of those same characters that you'd expect out of one of those wines.
So really
So
fresh
those again,
fruit and
yeah, fresh
yeah.
red fruit, balanced acidity, alcohol that's not over the top. Chambourcin can get up pretty high in bricks if you let it go longer. But again, that's not necessarily what we're looking for with this wine style. And again, these are all end up being very food friendly wines. Again, just it's about finding that balance in the wine that I think lends itself that way. And then for, we do a more ageable oak aged red out of Chambourcin as well. We're usually picking later in the season, maybe 24, 25 bricks. Um, a little bit more tannin. We let these wines sit on the skins for the duration of fermentation. So between a week or two, it depends on fermentation temperature. I usually, even with those reds, control the fermentation temperature a little bit to at least stay in the mid 70s at the most. We're letting them go all the way to the end of fermentation, so we're getting a little bit of tannin extraction, a little bit of seed tannin comes into those wines too, and those are also going to go through ML. So we're going to do malolactic conversion on those, like you would, most traditional red wines.
Okay. Are you looking for a reduction in acid, or are you looking for an inclusion of new aromas in that secondary fermentation?
Really both. We're wanting those wines to be a little bit more complex. It's a stability thing too. A lot of times I've seen if a winery here locally tries or doesn't go for ML conversion, that it'll happen anyway with a strain that they didn't add.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of a stability safety thing too. Just let's get that out of the way now during during the fermentation stage. And
control manner.
again, these wines are going into barrels, so they're going to sit in wood for typically about a year. I prefer to use more neutral barrels. Chambourcin's kind of a nuanced finesse variety, and I don't want to cover anything up with too much new oak. It really lets the kind of violet aromas and blackberry flavors shine through, which you wouldn't necessarily see if you were using brand new oak barrels.
Okay.
We typically associate Norton with Missouri, and you guys are pretty, close, similar climate, right? So how do you compare Chambourcin with Norton? How do they differ? What do you appreciate about Chambourcin compared to Norton?
Yeah, I think I just said nuanced or finessed with Chambourcin. Norton's a little less so. It's a little bit more gritty, a little bit more rustic, maybe is a good word for it. I like Norton too. It's just it's a different animal, and it maybe can handle a little bit more new oak than Chambourcin does and still shine through. We actually just bottled and released our first Norton from Kite Hill ever this last week. So that's been kind of fun to, I didn't really have access to Norton grapes for a lot of years. I had access a couple of years ago. So we got some and made some Norton.
Was it Norton grown in Illinois, or was it across the
Shawnee
border to?
Hills AVA Norton.
Wow, that's awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing that soon. What was different about the fermentation on that, or did you look for different harvest parameters, or how did that go?
So those grapes came in extremely ripe. I think it was 28.4 bricks or
Oh,
something like that. So there was a water addition to that wine, and it's amazing. You could never tell. This is still a inky, concentrated, tannic wine. It's young yet. It's a 2022 vintage. I think it has a lot of age in front of it. So Norton has that tendency to do that. We had a lot of dehydration in the berries, but I also didn't want to like 16.5% alcohol wine in the bottle, so we toned it down a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So did it come in late? Was it ripe just to help make sure that the acid was low enough and the grapes were fully mature, or what were you looking for?
Yeah, that's part of it. Also just flavor development. That's part
Okay.
of my technique, especially with reds, is tasting fruit in the vineyard. And Norton has the ability to create these really nice, just blueberry characters, and that's something I kind of look for in that variety. And it's a matter of waiting for certain flavor precursors that you're noticing in the vineyard. Balance of tannin in grapes in the vineyard, and with Norton, especially that acid. You want that acid to be at a manageable level once you get into the winery.
Okay. Okay.
That was an exceptional year too. We were in a bit of a drought, hot, sunny, dry, all through the ripening season. So that's not something that happens necessarily every year, but 2022 it did.
Mm-hmm. Can we touch on that a little bit about about the weather patterns, with climate change and how it has affected your region, and what did it used to be when when it was more stable, and what is it like now? Or has it even changed?
Yeah, I started doing this in 2007, so it's not like I have decades and decades of experience, growing grapes in the Shawnee Hills. But you know, for the first 10 years of growing grapes, we had one frost event, and it wasn't major. We just had a little bit of damage. Since then, so in the last 7 years, I think we've had 4 or 5 frost events.
Hmm.
So it's getting a little bit more sporadic. We're seeing these warmer temperatures in January and February that start the vineyard clock ticking. So we're seeing on average earlier bud break, which leaves us with more frost, danger from frost in that time frame. And it's hurt us a couple times in the last few years. On top of that, too, we're seeing more winter extremes. So, like I mentioned, back at the end of 2022, we saw -6 degrees. That's the coldest temperature recorded here in, like I said, 50 plus years. We thought we were safe growing a lot of vinifera varieties, and that made a lot of growers think, maybe that's not the best idea. And it's easy to
Okay.
say, like, oh, well, that's, a fluke thing. It hasn't happened in 50 years. It probably won't happen again for 50 years, but it might. It might happen
Yeah.
again every few years now.
Hmm.
So we're just seeing more sporadic weather, you know, more
Okay.
extremes. We're also the last 2 years been in a pretty significant drought situation. Um,
Hmm.
you know, 8 years ago or so, if you had asked me if vineyards in Southern Illinois should have irrigation, I'd have said no. Today, I'd say absolutely,
Hmm.
because we're seeing effects of this prolonged drought already. It would be really nice to be able to turn the water on. So there's some things that have changed here recently that I've noticed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it really interesting. Back to the cold temperatures. You're saying that people used to grow more vinifera, and that's because it can handle um, cold temperatures, or it couldn't handle cold temperatures, but you didn't have those cold temperatures, right? So now are people starting to pull out vinifera and plant more cold hardy varieties, or?
That's been kind of the consensus. Cab Franc is certainly the most common vinifera variety here. Of the vineyards that grow it, I know of one that's going to replant here after the 2022 event.
Okay.
We had some in the ground that is about half the vines got some crown gall on them from that event. We're kind of up in the air about, replanting more Cab Franc or doing something else. We haven't really made that decision yet.
Okay.
But there used to be Cabernet Sauvignon planted here. We had at Kite Vineyards Cabernet Sauvignon planted for about 15 years as just a test variety, and it did pretty well.
Hmm.
That's one of it's a little bit less hardy than Cab Franc is. So certainly that, variety would not have done very well in that situation. Um, Viognier is another,
Mhm.
somewhat common vinifera variety here. Viognier didn't do well with that cold event. I'm
Hmm.
not sure of any of it that survived. So we'll see. It's going to be up to these growers if they want to, go through that risk or not. It's very expensive to plant grapevines, and if it's a safer bet to put in more Chambourcin or Chardonnay or Vidal or something like that, I wouldn't blame anybody for making that choice.
Okay.
Re Retraining sucks too. If even if they stay alive and they die down, it just takes so much time and labor and just emotional energy too, going through it, so it's one thing economic wise, it's another just it puts a sour note on the year in years to
Yeah,
come.
there's the emotional part of it, and there's the physical part of it, and there's the monetary part of it, and any
Yep.
one of
Mhm.
those is probably enough to change your mind on on a certain variety, let alone all three
Yeah.
together. So
Yep.
yeah, it's tough to do that and lose grapes, lose vines.
Mhm.
So, so what do if you're looking at the vineyard in Chambourcin and you're talking to a grower, or if you're looking at your guys' vineyards, if you're looking at the vines, what do you think is super important on Chambourcin to get it to produce what you want? Are you leaf pulling, shoot thinning, combing? I mean, what are the traits in the vineyard or how it's grown that you think really lead to it being successful?
Um, yeah, all those things. We need an open canopy. We need, sunlight to reach the grapes and not to have too many layers of leaves. We need sunlight to reach, most or as many of the leaves as possible rather than having, a really thick canopy. Chambourcin tends to overproduce, so it often needs a bit of fruit thinning.
Big
It's not
clusters.
uncommon to get 4 clusters on a cane. We want more
Yeah.
like 2. So typically Chambourcin, you're putting some fruit on the ground every year. If you let it go, Chambourcin, I've seen Chambourcin crop at 11 tons to the acre without a problem.
Yeah.
I don't know that turns into the greatest wine in the world, but what we're looking for more is like 4 to 5 tons on an acre
Okay.
of Chambourcin. It is pretty typical, and I think that makes a really nice wine. Um, it is fairly disease resistant. I think I mentioned earlier it handles humidity well, but it doesn't really have much problems with like downy mildew. That's a problem that vinifera varieties here are really susceptible to downy mildew. Um, yeah, so disease control, as long as you have ample coverage, it's going to be okay there. Really, Chambourcin, especially if you make it into a red wine, can have the tendency to be a little bit herbaceous, and letting it ripen past that point, I think, is pretty critical for dry red wines.
Why should people go to the Shawnee Hills? I mean, you got lots of wineries in a tight geographic area. What else would bring people out there?
Well, we have the Shawnee National Forest, which basically is, tens of thousands of acres of wilderness, great hiking opportunities, great sightseeing attractions. It's just a beautiful, beautiful area. Like I said, cliffs, valleys. It's just, if you enjoy nature at all, it's a great place to be, along with the wineries. It's something that people often combine into a trip. They'll come hiking for a couple days, go to wineries for a day. There's camping, there are cabins and bed and breakfasts and cottages and rentals all over the place. It's really just a nice destination, and it's also somewhat unknown, so it's not a real crowded area. If you go to like the Smoky Mountains or something like that, it's
Yeah,
it's dense. There's a lot of people there, and that's not to say that it's not an amazing area, but if you're looking for something that's a little bit more laid back and off the beaten path, this is a great area for it.
it is on my to-do list. So,
Me
yeah.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, y'all got to come down. Well, and you've been to the area before, but only in the winter, right?
Well, it was early spring and I remember it being a very good weather weekend, but I was on such a tight schedule. I only had 2 or 3 days. I had no time for hiking, and I've been wanting to make a trip back. And as far as I know, Randall's getting a bus trip together.
This is true. Yeah, I don't know if we're going that far, but yeah, that's a
All
good
right.
point.
Yeah, we're an area where also the winemaker is very open, welcoming to
Cool.
folks. We'd love to talk about what we're doing here. We love to talk about wine. So if you
Yeah.
are in the area for any reason at all, stop by a winery and try to talk to a winemaker and come see what we have going on.
You guys have like an active wine trail, right? And would you say half the wineries in Illinois are by you, or how would you kind of look at the
Um,
geographic distribution?
well, yeah, there are a lot of wineries clustered right around. We're in the town of Carbondale here in Southern Illinois,
Mm.
and within, say, 30 miles, there's probably, I don't know, 18 wineries or so, something
Okay.
like that. There's like 150 wineries in the whole state, though. So,
Okay.
we're far from having, half of them here,
Okay.
but a lot of the other areas are much more spread out and
Yep.
not clustered together like it is here.
Well, that sounds like a no-brainer to me. I would love to come down, do some hiking, grab a bottle of rosé at the top of the hill, crack it open.
I have a hike with wine is a hashtag I use often on our social media stuff. So
That's
I take lots of
perfect.
pictures of a bottle of wine, sitting on the edge of a cliff or in front of a waterfall or something like that. That's something we use for our marketing. So
Huh.
We'll definitely
hike
be
with wine.
hashtagging that on this. Hike with wine. Write that down, Randall.
I'm writing it down.
Do you have any other comments, wine related or not, that you would like our listeners to know?
Maybe just, further on the hike with wine thing. That's something else I have a passion for, is just nature in general. So, yeah, get out and hike with some wine. It's a nice little break during your journey. Super refreshing. It gets everybody in the mood to head back to the car after a certain point in the hike.
Scott, it's been really wonderful having you on our show with us. I've loved hearing about Chambourcin. My mouth is just watering for Chambourcin right now. I know it's a delicious grape, and you're so right. Like, it's so versatile. So many yummy wines can be made from it. So I hope that all of our listeners can go out and find a bottle of Chambourcin. And if you can't find one in your grocery store, where can we order from to get it shipped directly to our house?
Yeah, Kite Vineyards and my other company, Holotype Wine Company, both ship to most states through our websites. You can have wine shipped straight to your door. We do have a few retail outlets throughout Illinois too, if you're in Illinois. But that's, if you're listening from North Carolina or Colorado or something, you can order our wines and have it shipped right to you. So kitehillvineyards.com, holotypewine.com are the two spots to do that.
Okay. We'll definitely be linking those on our website in the episode notes.
Hashtag hike with wine.
Hike with wine.
Hashtag hike with wine.
And if people
Awesome.
have any questions for you specifically, what's the best way to get a hold of you? I mean, do you prefer email? Do you social media? What do you recommend?
Yeah, I have social media. You can get a hold of me on there. You said you'll link through the show notes. But
Yep.
my email too, I'll just tell you, is my name with my middle initial. So it's scottealbert@gmail.com.
Easy
And
peasy.
anybody has questions, send me an email. Just want to say hi, or you're coming to visit and you want to let me know, I'll show you around our winery if that's the case. You're all more than welcome to do so.
Thank you so much for your open arms. It's very inviting.
Like I said, we like talking about wine, so come out and talk about wine with us if that's your thing.
Thanks for listening. Check out the Unwrapping Wine podcast on Facebook and Instagram for information about the show and upcoming episodes. We're also on unwrappingwine.com.